Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast.
When I was going back to edit this conversation that we had live with Jann and Mimi, it was just making me smile the entire time. I love this conversation. There's so much in here, from the emotional jobs to be done to the importance of relationships and marketing strategies to help buying groups reduce their risk, and why physical events are still so important. I hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Mark Binkley and Vasilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
And just before we get started with this episode, V and I would love for this show to be super valuable to you. So if you could rate the podcast, leave a review, leave some feedback about who you'd like to hear about or the topics that are really important to you, that'd be great. Jann and Mimi, welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast. You're leading the marketplace innovation team at LinkedIn, looking at the big models that are driving thought processes and decision-making in B2B. You've come out with some new research, well, lots of research actually in the last little bit. We're going to kind of merge a few of the things. A big part of that new research that you just presented here was around the emotion and the relational aspects of B2B buying. And so we'll dig into that a little bit. I did want to ask you a little bit of, first, just as a setup, just in terms of the paradox of like B2B buying process. We think we need to target the exact people in the buying process, but sometimes they don't have the complete decision-making authority that we think they do. Can you maybe just as a starting point talk about that, and then we can get into some of the other stuff?
Yeah, I'll start, and then I'm sure Mimi will say something much smarter after that. So the key thing about B2B buying is that it's much more relational than it is rational. Of course, there's rational aspects too, but the relational aspects of B2B buying are really the thing that often makes the decision between your product or service being buyable or it not being bought. And the key thing is that you have to have a kind of probabilistic approach in the way you think about targeting, because you need to get the confidence of the whole buyer group, as our research shows. And you need to make sure that you reach people who influence that buyer group. So you want to have broad reach, but you want it to be on target, and you want it to be relational reach, i.e. you're surrounding the people who are the ultimate decision makers, who are being influenced by their colleagues, peers, people they know, industry experts. So you really have to think of it as a relational game and creating a network effect where you build that proof point for your brand, for your product, for your service in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it. And within the category that you operate is the really important qualifier of B2B. So if I sell dental X-ray machines and I want to reach the 1,000 people who I think are key decision makers, right. Maybe there's really 6,000. I think there's probably more likely to be 6,000 than 1,000. But let's say you think that there's 1,000. It's within that category that you need to be famous. The long way round of doing that and the expensive way round of doing that is through, an F1 sponsorship. And that's like an optimistic trickle down model.
Right.
But we think that the understanding that the category is addressable and who they're influenced by is in fact a sort of an event horizon beyond which you don't necessarily need to go. But that is still a broad rather than a narrow targeting strategy. Right. Because what we're not saying is that, there are 58 decision makers and that's all that counts. There's a cloud, but they're a sort of connected cloud with a high interrelational, like if you could do a heat map, they're not only connected to you, but they're also connected to each other. That's actually the network that we approach when we want to make a decision. I think the point that Jann was making is the really clear and important point, which is there's a relational dimension that operates above and beyond the functional. Right. We're not saying that the functional doesn't matter. The functional will get you as far as being on functional pricing, transactional parity with a bunch of other vendors. What gets you beyond that, what influences is what our research did is to decode the levers of trust. And the levers of trust are human and connected. So relationships that can provide recommendations that you believe in because the use case is similar, the experience bench is similar, and perhaps the worldview is similar because we worked in similar companies and they cared about similar organizational things. That is the second part. And I think what we just defined is that's the mode. You don't get across that mode. you don't get bored. And it's fine if all we ever want to do is to be in the consideration set. If we only ever want to come third, we don't need to do anything different. Like everything that we're doing about the stuff. But if we want to get bored, something additional has to happen, and it's a commonality of things that are viable.
That's really interesting. I think it actually segues to the second question we had prepared for you. When we're thinking about that, buyers will naturally, maybe there's this illusion that buyers will often choose the best product. And you see a lot of the conversations or the reasons to buy that they're putting front and center, especially in the B2B. It's like really prominent. This is why you should be buying this product or service, right? Is that true?
Well, I've got a mini point of view and then I'll pass on to Jann. I think we want to believe that that's true. I mean, and I think one thing we know about human beings is that what we want to believe is often absolutely so powerful that we don't need to go beyond that. So, of course, buyers want to believe that everything is stratified in very measurable, rational reasons. But buyers are also buying for career reasons that are about defending their career. They don't really share in the upside if everything goes amazing. Yeah. They absolutely carry 100% of the downside risk. And so what buyers really want to buy is even more on parity, let's say. I mean, it came out slightly more, but let's say just on parity. You know, I want to feel confident that the thing I do can do the job. Yes, but slightly more than that, they want to buy a thing they can defend if it goes wrong. So those like that. They're pulling in totally different dimensions.
Yeah, I think it also, one way of explaining it is like people misunderstand what a product is in B2B. I think people in B2B have a very literal idea of like, our product is a piece of software that has like buttons and features, etc. Right. But if you know anything about strategy, you know that there's a long list of famous thinkers who talk about people don't want to buy a drill. They want to buy a thing that makes holes in the wall so they can hang a bookshelf. So what they really want is a way to put their bookshelf on the wall. So no one cares about the drill. They care about the holes it makes. Extrapolate that, right? Like we hire, or as Clay Christensen says, we hire things to do a job for us. Right. And so when you actually think of the product that way, what you need to do is you need to extend the definition of the product to mean people want to, in a B2B context where the downside risk is so big and you want to buy something that's defensible. The product is really, I want to buy a safe choice product or service that my peers and my boss and the rest of the buyer group thinks is acceptable to buy. Right. And so it's just the wrong way of looking at it.
I've just listening to you talk, I've literally had a brainwave now, which makes me realize that actually in our research, the scoring of the emotions, we actually just defined the emotional jobs to be done. We just haven't expressed it that way.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Jobs to be done to get something bought. And that's brilliant. If only, I mean, like...
We're thinking out loud here. Yeah. And you guys are helping us. No, it is.
Yeah, so the emotional jobs to be done are, I want to feel confident it does the job. I want to feel that I can defend it if it goes wrong. It has to be easy. The job to be done is it's got to be a relatively easy process. Right. Another job to be done is the buyer group's got to be aligned. You can't give me something that is kind of like everybody, half the people want it and half the people are like, we've never heard of it. Right. And the other is, you got to show me you can manage your downside. That is how to define.
I think it's really, no, this is great. That's why these conversations are really fun, right? Because if you think about it, like in B2C, no one thinks that like Coca-Cola is a thing that you use to hydrate your body with. It's a body hydration device. No one thinks of a Coca-Cola as that, but that's actually what it is if you analyze it, right? If you ask a robot to analyze it, that's what they would come up with. Or you would say, you know, what is lipstick or what is cosmetics, right? But we all know in B2C, you might sell soap in the store, but what people are buying is hope, right? It's hope that they're going to be attractive, that someone's going to like them better if they look nice, right? And that those same dynamics are true in B2B. They're just in different dimensions. because B2B companies are often run by engineers and very technical people who are very proud of the product they've built, they tend to too narrowly define it. It actually makes perfect sense to be irrational and go beyond the functional.
Yeah.
Because actually you need the whole package. You need the social and emotional needs to be met.
Yeah.
And that's why I think B2B marketing misses the mark by so much. And we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars being left on the table.
Yeah.
40% of all B2B deals get stuck because the buyer group cannot agree.
Make a decision.
It's because you haven't given them the product they really need, which is one that includes the social and economic needs and meets those needs, not just the functional needs.
It's interesting. You had presented previously on some research.
So this is so wild. This is like wild because in this minute, we've literally had it's another kind of cognitive breakthrough that it's the emotional jobs to be done. If only we'd said that yesterday.
But that's how I
You did have the slide up though about jobs to be done.
I know, but I hadn't really sliced it in that way. And obviously I've had 4 cups of coffee this morning and that's a rev on thinking. But why don't we think about that now? Emotional jobs to be done are not defined in B2B, but actually we have done a piece of work that defines those emotional jobs. Yeah. And there are some pragmatic, transactional jobs to be done, which we are saying they're highly addressed in marketing.
For sure.
They're highly addressed. The effectiveness of everything about them has been considered.
Yeah.
The emotional jobs to be done. Maybe it was just those 4. Yeah. Also, I think that the hope not so political party is just out there.
It is exactly the same thing. In B2B, people want to be sure. They want to feel safe.
Yeah.
They want to know that this thing will not blow up in their faces.
For sure. Yeah.
And, the biggest guarantor of something not blowing up in your face is that the entire buyer group has heard of the company that's selling this, and they all kind of nod their heads and go, you know what? Yeah. I've heard of these guys. People I know have heard of it. Yeah. Some people have said it's good. Some people I know have said it's good. Even better if someone I work with now has used them before and they said it's good. That's what we want, right? But no one thinks of it that way. They go what are our functionality? What are the 3 buttons that we have that our competitors don't have? Right. Forget about that. You're never going to get to that point unless the buyer group has heard of you and thinks you're okay to buy.
Can we riff on this?
I mean, it's very exciting. That's great.
I know. I literally had my coffee's on the table. So it is about emotional jobs to be done. So a point of view that we've always had, I don't know that we've fully articulated it, is that one deeply unaddressed emotional job to be done in buyer group buying, in group-based buying, in organizations is not to sacrifice political capital. That feels the job to be done. Yeah. And in fact, it was very interesting. We were at the ANA, and Jann can talk a little bit more about this. We were at the breakfast yesterday, and it's very, very senior CMOs in the industry. And we were just unveiling what we're now going to forever call the emotional jobs to be done. Mm-hmm. And, the CMOs are saying, oh, yeah, I really want to be able to stand in front of my board 2 years from now and say it wasn't the wrong decision to make. We couldn't have known differently at the time.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I suppose we hadn't really always thought of it at the CMO level because we're trying to think of it as at every level we want something to be true, but that jaw of not
reducing uncertainty.
Yeah. Reducing uncertainty is a nice way of saying it's the more palatable way of saying the number one job to be done for marketers is not to sacrifice. Marketers need to understand that their stakeholders, the buyers, cannot afford to sacrifice personal political capital. That's just too high a price. Do you think that? I mean, riffing is the thing.
No, I mean, it's you want to have certainty. You're trying to buy certainty, and a big brand. That's why big incumbent brands are so important, right? Yeah. I think it is different in B2B versus B2C. I think it's not just the straight, you need to build mental and physical availability. All those things are true, but it's a little bit more complicated and nuanced in B2B because you don't have that many light category buyers. That's not really how it works. It really is about, have we heard of this company? Do other people like me think this is a good idea? And therefore, that's a good proxy for me thinking that the rest of my buyer group and the other stakeholders are okay with this decision. And so I don't have to give up political capital. Right?
And often it's the only proxy. It's not like we grow up with 30 years of knowing how CRM systems work. So like diapers. So like when you have our children, like, oh, well, I know the diaper. And also I think, you come to Cannes and you see how quickly everything is changing. It's not only a proxy, it is often the only proxy. Yeah. And the only proxy is not now, I think, just even those kind of really bigger brands.
Yeah.
Recommendation from people that you trust, I think, are greater than, or significantly greater in value than unstructured, digested information or even historic information, because just because a vendor is good at X, they have to reprove themselves in category I, and they're competing with people. So, I think the thing that I find exciting about this idea is that it just opens up a kind of a competitive landscape where companies can compete better because you might have used to be the biggest, or you could have been the cheapest, but now you can be the most recommended. You can be the most liked. This is a lever. Recommendation. The least as a
politically,
it should be core
risky
brand strategy.
Yeah.
The ones who make it core brand strategy will win.
Yeah. And now a short word from our sponsor.
This episode was sponsored by Quadical. Did I say that right? Quadical?
You did. Quadical. Yeah.
Quadical. Mark, what is it?
Well, V, I'm glad you asked. Quadical is my own company, actually. So, I'm the Sleeping Barber podcast co-host with you, but I also have my own company. And so I'm happy to sponsor the Sleeping Barber podcast.
Love that.
Because I give so much time to it. But Quadical is a fractional marketing leadership firm where we specialize in evidence-based marketing. And we do consulting work for companies typically between $30 to $300 million, and helping them navigate some of the challenges that people have, like, I know something's broken, but I'm not quite sure how to fix it, nor do I have the time to fix it. And so that's where we help out a lot of people.
Well, I'll speak for Mark as well, because you're wearing your Quadical hat right now. We appreciate your sponsorship of the Sleeping Barber podcast. And for all those that may be interested, we do have a whole bunch of sponsorship options. Always looking to bring on new sponsors. We have a lot of creative ideas that can really help across a global audience.
Thanks, V.
No, thank you, Quadical. We appreciate your business.
And now back to the show. Yeah. There's so many things that I'd like, were just rolling in my mind as we were talking about this, but there's this one idea around, like, so much creative has been produced that shows just the buttons you were talking about. And, oh, by the way, we're in aerospace, so we have to have a plane in the background or an engine of some, and it's got to be specifically, like, we have to promote that, that.
Yeah.
Even though there might be a whole bunch of other buyers that are part of the buying process that aren't really caring about the buttons that we have on our product.
That's right.
They just want to know whether they've heard of us or not.
That's right. Half of the buyer group really couldn't care less about the features and functionality. What they care about is, are you a reputable company? Are your payment terms compliant with our financial policies, right? Is your IT security certification up to scratch so that we can actually integrate your system? It's a lot of stuff that's not about the functionality and features. I also want to just go off on a quick tangent because I think it's something occurred to me. I want to pose it more as a question and see if you agree. But I think there's actually a weird sort of distribution in B2B that's not a bell curve. It's actually the opposite. It's sort of like a bow tie, where on the one end of the spectrum, you have huge brands that are very well known by everybody. And a lot of them are what I would call Nepo brands, right? So if you have a big consumer business like your Microsoft, your Google, your Amazons, everyone already knows you. And that is a massive, massive, massive advantage, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have tons and tons of companies who are like, we're a really amazing, tiny niche, but like super profitable, interesting, cutting edge technology or cutting edge service, whatever, but no one's heard of you. And you almost have kind of the opposite problem, because if you're the big company, your biggest problem is people don't know that we also do A. in Y category. Everyone's heard of us, but we don't come to mind when people think of a specific category. And we need to work really, really hard to actually make sure that people understand that we apply to that category, which is a specific problem where you need to reach the right buyer group in the right category. You need the right relational reach. And then the other guys have the opposite problem where they're like, we cannot buy a football stadium or run a Super Bowl ad and become a household name. That's just not attainable.
Yeah.
So again, we have to focus on we have to be famous in our category, and we have to be famous with the right people. So in both, even though they're kind of opposing problems, the solution is actually similar, which is you need to really nail being well known in your category with the right cohort of people who each influence each other.
Sure.
And if you're a big brand, that sort of accidentally happens to you, but you could be more deliberate about it. And if you're a small brand, you have to work super hard to be able to make that happen. You have to be very strategic about it.
It's definitely harder if you're a small brand. I hear a lot of brands say, hey, we're really big over here, but we have to prove ourselves again.
Yeah.
But I still feel like that's still easier with a big brand.
I mean, if you're MasterCard, for example, right? Most of us carry a MasterCard in our pocket. So we're intimately familiar with the brand and have done a great job building that brand, right? But of course, they want to be known for like very sophisticated B2B payment solutions, things that don't come to mind, right? Where I think much more of like blockchain startups or, crypto or whatever, and that they don't own that category. So for them, it's really important to be known in that category. And that's something that they're trying to solve.
If you want to jumpstart being known in a category by doing the most high value activities is to identify, I think, the use cases of the companies that you want to buy from you, which you have your marketing strategy is all about identifying who those are, finding the most common use cases, and then visualizing that in an authentic way. And I don't mean you have to look like, I'm not going to buy a CRM system because somebody looks like Mimi, but if someone who looks like Mark has similarities in the use case, the company size, the problem set, the anxiety, the stakeholder map I had to... Mark is my guy. Like, he's literally my guy.
Yeah.
That's, I think, we want to, that's the unfair advantage. We want to help B2B marketers understand how to buy runs in a world where they're currently trying to buy players.
Right.
If you That's a baseball analogy, by the way, for those of us who don't play baseball.
Yes, this is the Moneyball thing. Jann and I constantly argue over whether people understand Moneyball or not.
I know it.
But because I'm, not really a sport person, and I understand the Moneyball thing. I speak to everything. But it is, there is a quicker way of winning than hoping that size and asymmetric advantage are the way to go. Everything I've ever learned about marketing is if you spend more money, you're going to be more successful. And that's unfortunately... if that's true, then we don't need marketers at all because there's nothing you can do. Yeah. We have to believe that there are ways within that. That do something other. At least that's my point.
We've indirectly talked about this. We welcomed, I think it was 2 years ago, Brett Adamson to the podcast, and we're talking about how the buying groups are evolving. And there used to be a point in time it was like 5 people. You had to make sure that you kept happy, or at least there was alignment. Yeah. But it sounds like that number keeps growing. I think he cited 11 to 12, I think, at the time. I think in the preamble, you guys were showcased there's additional research suggests it's more.
Research that says it's 23 or more.
That's insane.
Look, it's also, there's a distinction between who are the immediate, if you narrowly define a buyer group and say, okay, who is signing the check, who has veto power over it. But again, that's way too narrow a definition because it's networks, it's network effects that influence your B2B purchase decisions, right? And so you really need to surround the right people with the right proof points. And the best way to do that is through personal, professional network effects, right? I know people personally, or I know people who I respect, and they seem to be saying, this is an okay thing to buy. You're safe if you buy it. Right? It's incredibly important. The other thing I would say is, because there is a change happening in our industry in the way people buy things, number one, there's a generational change, right? There's a lot more Gen Z millennials now in the buyer group, up to 71% according to some research. So they're weighing in ways that are different. They're much savvier about just knowing through their social setup, is this for real? Do people like me like this? Have others heard of it, etc.? They're much more savvy. And then the other thing is, of course, the big word that everyone's using these days, AI, right? There's going to be a change where there's going to be AI agents helping you make decisions. That's already a reality. You can already say, ChatGPT, give me a comp list of software solutions for this according to the following criteria, and they will go and do everything for you, right? But what that means is human validation, that kind of relational proof you're going to get before you buy, is becoming more important. And so people will outsource a lot of the functional rational. What buttons does this thing have? What case studies do they have? Are they compatible with X, Y, Z? Right? They're going to outsource all that, and they're going to say, let's have a meeting. Let's sit down with them. Let's ask around. Let's ping some people on LinkedIn saying, hey, have you worked with it? Hey, Mark, have you worked with this company? For real? Do you like them? Do they say what they say? Do they actually do what they say they do? That's going to become more important. And that's always been human nature. But interesting enough, AI has a way of kind of making us focus more on the human thing. Yeah. Because a lot of the task-based stuff is going to be taken care of by AI.
Sure.
The generational shift, and also what is fundamental in B2B, which might be different from B2C. I think there's a multiplier effect there with people becoming proxies. People are proxies for whether I trust a brand rather than a brand. You know, listening to a brand tell you that you should trust it is much less valid with a generation of social media natives who have always gone to people that they trust rather than brands. And brands now go to people that they trust in order to communicate with them. I think we've seen that happening over the last 15 years in a very much more B2C way. But I do think that these two tectonic plates actually amplify the same result in B2B, which is why I think it might be easier to be, you know, if I find B2B influencers who had similar problem sets to me, similar customer size, want to make a similar buying decision, I am now in the 21st century in the best place in the history of humanity to hear their point of view. And they will be a much stronger driver of trust than anything, I suppose, that the brand itself is actually saying.
Yeah. It's almost like there's a internal benchmarking, so to speak, like of, you know, companies do this all the time where they go, well, let's benchmark ourselves against the competitors. But internally on a decision-making process, I think there's a benchmarking that happens. Maybe not so overtly, but, you know, have I heard of this company? Yes. Yeah. Have I heard of this company? Yes or no? And there's this thing where even just thinking about what you were saying earlier around to people like me buy things like this, or to companies like us, ours buy things like, I think about coming to Cannes or any other conference I've been to. And there's this idea of like, okay, me coming back to where I'm going to go with all these new ideas. And we've all probably had experiences like this. And all of a sudden, I'm almost like a virus inside the organization if it's not well accepted already within the organization. And so there's this natural antibody response from the organization. Yeah. Culturally, if it's not set up to accept new ideas, they just reject the new ideas. And so then no matter how smart the things are that people say here, I go back and they're like, that's not the way we.
But events, I mean, you made me think of something when you said, Cannes as an event. People sort of poo-poo events, and especially Cannes gets a lot of ridicule for how crazy it is. And like, oh, this seems very self-indulgent, etc. Of course, when you look outside and you see all these ad tech companies with giant yachts and stuff, I agree. That's probably not a good idea. But the social validation, the human validation power of a physical event where you go somewhere and you see with your own eyes other people engaging with ideas or companies, etc. And you see they're for real. I respect them. I see them talk about something like that. Kind of, it's so hardwired into human nature. I'm a huge believer in the power of physical events. Actually, LinkedIn is building some very sophisticated events ad prop where you can promote your event and you can take some of that human validation out back into the digital world, right? Where you could have a physical event and then you can amplify it into the digital world.
That's really interesting.
Because people seeing real humans interact at an event and endorsing something is very, very powerful. And there's also the costly signaling part of it where, like, if you can afford to send people to a big conference or have a booth do an event, that shows that you believe in the validity of your own stuff and you're putting your money behind something.
Showcasing it.
I get a random ad in some random setting, right? The context matters. The credibility of a platform, whether it's a physical event or an online platform, it really matters. We register the context of that very, very strongly as humans.
Yeah, I think lots of things, especially events, maybe don't make sense empirically, but they do make sense behaviorally. So from a behavioral perspective, you're like, yeah, those guys, wow. Not so well. We just interpret that. That's the 95% of our brain that doesn't even do the thinking. It just does the absorbing and makes a thought through evaluation of something very, very quickly. And not that we're here to sell event ads, but the thing that the event ads, I think does is it allows you to stitch together to get empirically better value, but also that creates an investment case to make for something that is actually, the value is intangible.
That's right.
The value is really intangible. The value, the signaling value is deeply intangible.
And nonlinear. That's the thing. Yeah. People in B2B marketing are so freaking like literal and linear.
I'm speaking out for people in B2B marketing. People who've got like opportunity to do it.
No, I mean, we just need to, like, the way you win is you realize that's not how the world works. And so if you can be brave enough as a B2B marketer and be nonlinear and be much more probabilistic rather than deterministic. And if you have enough credibility where your CFO or CRO or CEO believes it when you tell them, look, I can't give you a spreadsheet tomorrow that shows how this worked, but this is a leading indicator for something that's going to pay off later. Every great investor, like Warren Buffett didn't become Warren Buffett by saying, this needs to pay off tomorrow. Show me in a spreadsheet that this is guaranteed to work. Like value creation and capitalism is about coming up with new things that people couldn't predict from the beginning. And we need to get a lot more comfortable using that kind of value investment language. I think that's very, very important because there's so much opportunity here when you realize that if you embrace the relational nature, the intangible nature of B2B marketing, you can create outsized enterprise value. This is not fluffy. People think it's fluffy, touchy-feely. It's not. It cuts to the heart of like, how does value actually get created? And how do you become a business that has a real strategy rather than trying to imitate what other businesses are doing and saying, show me that someone else has already done this and that it works, and only then will I do it. By definition, you can only become you can only add incremental value if you do that. You can't create outsized value.
Right.
And like great companies like ServiceNow, for example, or Salesforce, right? Like they've won because they invested in the long-term power of brand building, and they're now the category leaders. And once you're a category leader, you make money while you sleep because people kind of do the work for you. That's really powerful.
I think that it's worth softening some of that to some extent because, B2B marketers have difficult jobs and operating within tough constraints. And there is an opportunity to demonstrate a kind of like absolutely a strategic value, but not everybody can take those things.
To be clear, you're absolutely right to qualify that. I'm being very ambitious about what could be possible.
You're absolutely right about what could be possible and what is true. Like, so that's absolutely true. And I think that we see every deeply owner, founder-led, vision-led entrepreneurial business as typically led by someone who's prepared to take a risk on something intangible.
Right.
For those who are not in a situation where they are able or empowered to take a risk based on an intangible, surrounding their position with some additional data points, influence, or even a vision that then they can take away back to their organizations and try and use. I think that does have value. And we're actually proving through data what the jobs to be done are that drive purchase behavior, drive buying, buy, selling, whichever part of the world you want to contribute, we actually got over the line. Too. So there are some things
I think that's a wonderful qualification of my point.
There is a way of, you're absolutely right about every innovative thinker who has made a difference has said, I believe in something that I cannot prove.
Right.
Right. And that's
that's huge.
And you need, I mean, if you look at, the ones I mentioned, like ServiceNow or Salesforce, they're led by very visionary CEOs who themselves believe in the power of marketing and the power of brand building. And not every company is running that way. Right?
No.
There's a lot of companies that are much more cautious about how they approach value creation, or they're much more technical.
Yeah.
But it is very important, as Mimi said, that we need to try and bring everybody along on this journey, and we need to try and have enough solutions for people who cannot. You can't switch out your CEO and say, let's get in someone who is more innovative. If you're running, if you're a mid-level marketing executive, that's not up to you to make that decision. You have to work with what you have.
Right.
So I have a tremendous amount of empathy for that. And I think there's ways you can approximate this, and there's ways in which you can do this on a smaller scale. And then you have a proof point and you can say, look, we tried this. And it worked, right? We invested in full funnel marketing. We invested in building the right on-target category reach, and it worked. So now we get more budget to do it again at the bigger scale, and you build from there.
There's a couple, I know we don't have that much time left, a couple minutes, but there's so many things running through my mind right now. But you mentioned the Warren Buffett thing, and all of a sudden I had that quote about the voting machine versus the weighing machine with the stock market. Over time is a weighing machine, but in the short term it's a voting machine, which then made me think about the relational metrics that you were talking about and the influences that relate to behavior. And so much of what we're doing, I think, from a B2B perspective is using the voting machine to score things that are really should be measured in terms of its weighting machine. And so the relational metrics that happen over the life cycle of a buying product or buying a B2B product, which can be 2 to 3 years. And we're just looking at the leads in as the voting rather than looking at the weighing of, do people like me buy things like that? Yeah.
I think the findings of the research that we showed, which we can basically run through a little bit, I think they give any marketer anywhere, big, small, medium, or startup, a perspective on what could be more successful for them, right? And I think we apply that as a slide rule to our work, and we're constantly saying, being asked are their use cases different? Are different audiences different? And I think that we are. It's as applicable, and I think potentially more valuable in a way, the smaller that you are. Just as the reason that when we talked about the customer promise research, I was really excited about it because it performed well for everybody, and it performed best for the people with the least amount of money.
Right.
The customer promise is, if everything else you don't have a lot of, make a customer promise, and it's 3 times more likely to increase your market share. If you do it at the top, it's like 1.58 times more likely. But if you do it at, so there was a thing about that. And I think that, understanding the emotional jobs to be done to make your product buyable are absolutely got to feel confident that it does the job. But also, it's got to be a decision that you can defend. What's the quickest way to defend that decision? Companies like us recommended it.
Yeah.
Even if you only take that away from, I think,
still,
6 lines, that's a pretty good rubric. You can then take your knowledge of your business, your category, and if you want to be famous and you're not you're not your parents aren't rich and good looking in the Lipo brands, which I love, then being likable
goes a long way.
Goes a long way.
Can I squeeze in one more? Just
Please.
Quickly. You talked about emotions again. In research, what emotions are ranking the highest?
Well, I'm glad that you asked the question because I'd like to reframe the question, which is what are the emotional jobs to be done to make something viable?
That's a great frame.
Yes.
Great frame.
And that would not have happened if we hadn't had this conversation.
We inspire people.
Yeah.
Right. No, that's why we
That's right.
we do all of our best thinking on the sleeping barber pot.
That's right. But that is why it's actually amazingly good to have these kinds of conversations, which are useful and sort of structured, but also totally unstructured. Maybe too unstructured. But anyway, 5 things emerged as the emotional jobs to be done that buyer said, without this, I cannot buy. One is the thing can do the job. Another is the process was relatively easy. Another is the buyer group were generally aligned. Another is I knew there were going to be downsides. There are always bumps in the road, but I felt that we could manage them. I didn't think something was going to come out of left field and knock us all on the head and we'd be done. And then the fifth is I need to be able to defend the decision if it goes wrong. So that was the 5 major things they came out of the qual. And actually, when we scored them in sequence, they were, not more than 10 points apart. There was a parity because obviously that validated that they were the ones that came through. The number 2 thing that buyers want to buy, the job they want to be done is it can do the job.
It can do the job.
The number 1 thing is I can defend a bad decision. Yeah. That's actually the number 1 job to be done.
Risk that you're
maybe in a deeply intangible way that we find hard to articulate. So you can't say to your boss's boss, yes, I'm only going to buy this because it's good for my political, because it's the least cost of my political capital. That is the principal agent problem that we see manifested in buying behavior.
Yeah. And it's perfectly reasonable to not be rational in B2B. It's perfectly reasonable because you're buying very complicated things. Yeah. And it's unsure whether they really are going to work out the way you do, right? If you buy a super complicated software system or you buy financial services from a company because you're trying to acquire a business or be acquired, like those are complicated things. It's not does this drill holes? Yes, no, right? It's a lot more complicated. So actually, focusing on how do we protect ourselves in case things don't go to plan, that is perfectly reasonable. We all should do that as B2B buyers to some extent because that's just smart business.
Go ahead, Mimi.
I've actually figured out what our next podcast franchise would be. So whenever I listen to you, I'm talking about things that we've been thinking about this for a year, for a whole year. And now we've got some results. We kind of go through it and riff through it and we get out even more. But I think that it's perfectly reasonable not to be rational podcast out there that has not been developed. That I think it is perfectly reasonable not to be rational. In fact, it's very unreasonable to be rational. So anyway, there's a franchise out there somewhere.
We can print some t-shirts. Maybe we can print some t-shirts that are as good as your t-shirts.
This has been amazing. How can people find out more about the stuff that you guys continue to do? Where can they find
follow us on LinkedIn.
Yeah, you should definitely follow us on LinkedIn.
Interesting stuff as we possibly can. We've got a post out. We've just got the slides and the data that we've got so far. About what's happening.
So we have a big industry partnership that we announced here in Cannes together with the ANA, the IAA, which are the 2 big advertising industry trade organizations, Cannes Lions and WARC, and lots of other great partners like Marcus Collins, our friends at Bain & Company. So we've built a really amazing movement that's about the future of B2B through the lens of buyers. So how do you become more buyable? Wow. So the Buyability project is well on its way. We'll have more research coming out in the fall. We're building a big playbook for next year. So stay tuned. There's a lot coming and it's exciting.
Basically, we're going to have you guys back is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, we have some of the smartest people in the industry working with us, and that's really exciting.
And a couple of the best podcasters in the industry as well,
You're our favorite.
Part of this building.
I am.
That's right.
I had these ideas.
That's right.
That's right.
See? Exactly.
With you today.
It happened here.
Ideas don't happen only in research. It's not like you get some research, you do a nice PowerPoint deck, and it's like, now we've added knowledge to the world.
If you like this show, please leave a review. And even if you didn't, we'd love to make this show better, and your feedback will help us do that.